Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith. Today, we're joined by Sean Bigley, Assistant Director of Water for the City of Roseville, and Jim Peifer, who's the Executive Director for the Regional Water Authority. Jim, Sean, welcome to the Public CEO Report.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Of course. I love conversations with fellow local government people, making it happen. All right. So you guys are in the water world, correct? Let's start. Sean, let's start with you. What do you do for water with the City of Roseville?
Yeah, so I'm an assistant director with the City of Roseville. I work in a department called Environmental Utilities, and it's actually a department that actually has water, wastewater, and a waste services utility. So it's a large umbrella. And what I do is I'm responsible for oversight of the city's water utility as well as the wastewater utility.
All right. And Jim, tell me how you connect to water.
Hi, I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority. We are an organization that represents the interest of 22 water purveyors in the greater Sacramento region. Our mission is to serve and represent the interest of regional water providers and stakeholders for the purpose of improving water supply reliability, availability, quality, and affordability.
So are you a JPA?
Yes, we are.
Okay. But you're not a wholesale water supplier?
No, we're not a wholesale water supplier. What we do, though, is provide joint programs through our members. An example of this, our oldest program, is our water use efficiency program. Many people who are come to the Sacramento region may see billboards suggesting that people reduce their water demand. That's an example of a joint program to advertise in the greater Sacramento market the need for increased water use efficiency. We also do a little bit of advocacy, and we also have a key program for adapting to climate change called the Sacramento Regional Water Bank.
Okay. So I will say in my work in local government, I have not encountered a JPA. I've seen a couple groups that are like nonprofits or just loose organizations, but an actual JPA formation, that's interesting. And I assume, Roseville, you're a member of this JPA?
Yeah, we've been a longstanding member of the Regional Water Authority, and definitely are contributors to the greater effort that Jim's group convenes, and really a proud member of RWA for a number of years.
Very interesting. And then I guess at the risk of getting too much into detail, how do you fund the JPA? Is it a portion of water allocation, or is it like how does that work?
There's a dues that are paid to the JPA once a year based on the size of our members, the number of connections that they have. That's how it's funded.
All right. Interesting. And can more cities join, or are you guys maxed out in terms of your JPA?
Generally focused on the greater Sacramento region, but we actually have had a couple new members recently. The Nevada Irrigation District last year, and also the Georgetown Divide Public Utilities District are new members. So new water agencies, new special districts that joined.
Very interesting. Okay. And in terms of the work you guys do in Roseville on the retail side, just give me a sense of organizational size. How many hookups do you have? How big is your water network you're supplying? And I assume you're everything from all the water supply, the pipes in the ground, all the billing services, and then on top of that, do you have your own water supply as well?
Yeah, so in terms of our system is approximately 600 miles worth of water distribution mains within the city of Roseville. We have about 52,000 retail connections within our service area. The city of Roseville since 1971 has been a Central Valley Project contractor. We get our primary surface water supply from Folsom Reservoir, and that's a federally operated facility by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So we've had that water supply in place for a number of years. In addition, we work very closely with the Placer County Water Agency, an agency east of us that's adjacent to our city border. that we work closely with, and we also have an additional water contract with them as well. That actually accesses what's called the Middle Fork Project, which is a series of reservoirs upstream of Folsom Reservoir, and that water is ultimately conveyed through the Middle Fork of the American River, which ultimately drains into Folsom Reservoir. In addition, the city of Roseville has some very unique infrastructure in the groundwater realm, what are called aquifer storage and recovery wells. We call it ASR. And what these wells are capable of is, in addition to sort of traditional extraction capabilities, these wells can actually be used to actually recharge water into the groundwater basin. And so we've recently been able to do that after this series of storms. And that serves as an additional sort of point of water supply for us. And then lastly, I would just say we also operate a recycled water service or utility. Essentially what that is that provides recycled water from our 2 regional wastewater treatment plants, treated at the level appropriate by state of California standards. And essentially that water is used to irrigate our parks, our landscapes, and those types of uses, primarily on the western side of the city of Roseville.
So you have purple pipe, is that right?
Correct. Purple pipe. Yep.
All right. Love me some purple pipe. For everybody out there who doesn't know this, when you see purple pipe, I believe this is the case. That means it's recycled water of some form. So probably not drinkable, certainly, but great for irrigating.
Absolutely. Good water for irrigation.
Yes. All right. So first question is, how'd you both end up in this water world, I guess? Let's dive into that real quick. Go ahead and start with you. No, I'll start with you, Jim.
So I was interested. When I was young, my parents took me camping. I was interested in the outdoors, and that led to an interest in resource management. So I majored in civil engineering at the University of California, Davis. And after that, when I graduated, I worked for a consulting firm in San Diego County, and then another one in Ventura County. Then I made my way back to Northern California. My wife is from Northern California, so we wanted to buy a house up here. And about 20 years ago, I went into the public sector, and I found it to be very interesting. And that led to where I am today, is in this job, working for the Regional Water Authority.
All right. And Sean, how about yourself?
Well, my journey isn't necessarily straightforward. I've had a pretty diverse public career. I've really worked pretty much in every level of government that exists. But in terms of how I arrived at the city of Roseville, I previously worked for the state of California for 9 years, actually in the Attorney General's office for that last stint, doing budget fiscal policy work and some legislative advocacy. Really what got me to the city of Roseville is, being in a big sort of state bureaucracy, I really had this deep desire to serve the public, serve the community at the local level. That had a lot of meaning for me. That was always in my mind when I went through school, is to really to put what I've learned and that sort of duty and eagerness to engage in public service, put it to use at a local level where it's very hands-on, it's very tangible. You see some of the results of your work based on working in local government. So eventually I was lucky enough to get a job with the city of Roseville. And it so happened to be in environmental utilities. And so I've been with the city for 18 years now. I've worked a multitude of jobs, from public information to working on fiscal items to policy advocacy, things like that, and eventually made my way into this particular position at this point in time. So it's kind of not a straightforward journey, but certainly this is where I'm at today. And I love my job, I love the career, and I love the industry for sure.
Sean, I suspect we can come back and do a whole other podcast about local versus state relations and the challenges and misunderstandings of each about the other. That would be probably pretty interesting. And as a very heavy local government guy, I'd probably be coming at it with guns a-blazing on incursions into local control as part of a conversation.
Right. You're right. Absolutely.
All right, but let's stick with water for today. Let's talk a little bit about a drought, right? I mean, we can't talk about water without talking about drought in California. Maybe I should just take the elephant out of the room because we are currently recording this on the tail side of a pretty massive wave of rain that's landed in the yards and in the streams and the mountains for California. Just a quick sense, where is that left either your member agencies, Jim or Sean? Where's Roseville find itself in terms of water supply issues right now, and how you're where you stand on the kind of drought circumstances at this point in time? Why don't you go ahead and go first, Jim?
So what I want to say is for our local agencies within the Sacramento region, they're in pretty good shape. They're going to have a water supply for the rest of the year, especially water purveyors that are within the American River Basin or Yuba Basin. Mother Nature has been really, really helpful and has filled up Folsom Reservoir and has dropped a lot of snow. I think for the long term, that's going to be a different story. Some people say that we're in a mega drought right now, and really to adapt to the changes that we're seeing in the climate, we're going to really have to build projects to improve our resilience. And we're doing that. I talked a little bit about the Sacramento Regional Water Bank earlier. That's an initiative to be able to store water underground when there's plenty of water. And that happened just recently. As you said, we had a number of atmospheric rivers that rolled through California. So what we want to do is be able to utilize that surface water and then bank groundwater. And the city of Roseville actually has a great program to address that, but I'll let Sean talk about that. When we don't have much surface water, what we want to do is be able to use that previously stored groundwater to serve our customers' needs within the region. And again, many of our agencies do that type of thing, but what we want to do is formalize what we call the Sacramento Regional Water Bank and establish a set of rules to assure its sustainability into the future. Just one last thing. Again, we're seeing a changing climate that's going to change water supplies in the future, and the Sacramento region is well positioned to be able to adapt to it, but it's going to take some investment, again, to build the projects that we need to address a changing hydrology in the future.
So Sean, I'll let you comment a little bit too about some of those points and weave in some of the projects you're working on. Then I have some follow-up questions. But one thing I would love to ask and interject here is I've heard reference to surface water and groundwater. So if you want to explain the difference between those two and what that really means for the average schmo, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So generally speaking, surface water refers to exactly that. It's essentially water that exists and is conveyed on the surface of the earth on the planet. Groundwater,
so lakes and rivers.
Lakes and rivers, yeah, reservoirs, things like that. In terms of groundwater, typically groundwater, what we're referring to is groundwater is water that exists within a basin, and essentially a typical basin is sediments, really fine rocks, things like that. And that water basically over time percolates into the ground, and it actually exists within those small spaces between those rocks and fine grains. And so there's a tremendous amount of, in some areas of California, there's such as our region, the Sacramento region, there's a tremendous amount of storage capacity and capability as far as groundwater is concerned.
And so that's just because of the nature of how the Earth's crust or soil is composed there. And are we talking about 20 feet below ground? Or are we talking 500 feet below ground?
For typically what we see in Roseville is, 300 to 400 feet. That's kind of the usable space kind of in between there. But really it does, there is typically some space where that water doesn't obviously percolate above a certain level of ground. But yeah, 300 to 400 feet. You go beyond that, the water starts to get a little bit, has a higher salt content and some other issues. And so it really does vary by geography. It varies by where in the basin you're at. There's obviously some areas that have levels of minerals or other things that aren't necessarily good from from either an aesthetic standpoint or in some cases that you wouldn't want to serve to your customers because they go over certain legal limitations. But generally speaking, there's a tremendous amount of potential in the Sacramento region to be able to both add through recharge, taking surface water and actually recharging the groundwater basin. But similarly, during dry or drought periods, there's a lot of potential to actually extract that water and use it for beneficial purposes. And Jim, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the Sacramento Regional Groundwater Bank and what that potential is.
So is the groundwater bank using similar technology what you described earlier, which is injecting into ground and then pumping back out of that ground too, or is it more percolation methodology with spread fields and things like that?
Well, I mean, conceivably, it has sort of the potential for really kind of all those different types of methods. I'll speak just for the city of Roseville, and Jim can probably give a better lay of the land in terms of other methods to contribute to a regional groundwater bank. But for the city of Roseville, we're able to leverage our aquifer storage and recovery wells. We actually currently have 5 ASR wells, aquifer storage and recovery wells, that are in the city of Roseville. That are active in terms of actually doing recharge operations. We have 2 more that are actually going to start construction here in probably about 3 to 4 months. And actually, let me back up. We actually have 2 wells that are about ready to be operational, 2 additional wells operational in about 2 months, and then another set of 2 that we're going to start construction on, and then after that, another set of 2. So Roseville is really has been very active in terms of investing and expanding our aquifer storage and recovery groundwater well infrastructure within the city. What we're hopeful for, working with the Regional Water Authority, is eventually to be able to work with other water agencies that implement similar infrastructure improvements and developments over time to really sort of scale up the benefits of aquifer storage and recovery in terms of how you can operate it and take advantage of some of the wetter periods or flood control periods that we have where there's excess water in the system, and being able to recharge where appropriate. And then during the dry or drought periods, being able to reduce the demand on our surface water supplies, reduce the impact to the lower American River and the environment and the species that live within that river, and instead use groundwater during dry or drought periods. So it's a practical way to really sort of navigate through a variety of hydrological conditions. It's also going to be very important in terms of being able to effectively manage through changes that we have seen and will see with climate change. And also it has some benefits in terms of being really good for the environment, generally speaking, in terms of how it's operated. And I'll just say finally, recently we did have the opportunity to work with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We actually during and slightly after the storm events that we saw during the beginning portion of January, we were actually able to recharge about 460 acre feet of water. That equates to about enough water for 1,000 households for an entire year. So if you can imagine something like that scaled up on a regional basis, there's a tremendous amount of potential within the Sacramento region to have a really nice, robust regional groundwater bank that's going to provide a lot of benefits for folks in the future.
So at the risk of getting kind of out of order and logic of explaining water banking, and I'll promise, Jim, I'll get to you in that in 1 second. Can you quickly explain, like, what's the benefit of, first of all, the benefit of using wells to inject the water into the ground as opposed to like a field where you let it percolate down? And then secondarily, do you have issues in doing that where your basin, like if your basin spreads out to other basins, do you risk recharging other people's well systems, or is it contained enough within how you define the geography there that you're preserving it for yourself?
Yeah, so generally speaking, if you're talking about direct recharge, essentially what we're doing is we're taking the pressure from the distribution system, and we're by just virtue of the pressure, we're actually directly pushing water into the groundwater basin. We actually have to monitor it, make sure that we don't do it too much where we get mounding or getting surfacing of that groundwater ultimately. So it's probably faster, I would say, than just sort of natural percolation, which is great as well. But it's a direct way to really recharge the basin. In terms of your question, in terms of when you recharge, the basin, you have this sort of recharge bubble that's there. Does it travel? Yes, it does travel over time, but it travels really, really slow. And generally speaking, in terms of how we operate, we're all part of a groundwater sustainability agency within Western Placer, which is interconnected with other groundwater sustainability agencies within the Sacramento region. And we really kind of view it as just it's part of a way to not only store water for future use during drought periods, but we're also adding additional water to the groundwater basin. And it's really good and healthy for our groundwater basin in terms of its long-term sustainability. So there's a lot of benefits, both direct and indirect, for the city of Roseville, and also generally speaking, it's beneficial from our perspective for the entire Sacramento region, if you look at it sort of as the collective whole.
And then I think one other related question, again, just dive into detail to understand it, but I'm curious, the advantage of injecting into the ground as opposed to just building another reservoir somewhere, right, or a giant pond. What's the advantage with that?
Well, I mean, you really, if you talk about sort of percolation, opportunities, there's a couple things that you really have to look at. Number one, you have to find available land that exists at that scale to be able to provide the level of recharge that you're really looking for. The other thing that you have to really account for is you have to have the right conditions in terms of the basin. I'll give you an example in Western Roseville. We've got a lot of area that's has a very almost impermeable clay layer. And so in those particular circumstances, it's pretty difficult to get effective recharge in those particular circumstances. So being able to do direct recharge through these wells, you have a much smaller physical footprint above ground. And we're able to leverage the benefits of using system pressure to push it in. So it's probably, being able to spread water over land has a lot of advantages, and it does happen in other parts of California. And by all means, they're beneficial when they work. But there's a lot of sort of constraints that you obviously have to account for that I just described.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the dirt underground is free. So that's a pretty good price for real estate.
Yeah.
If I could jump in too.
Please, Jim.
What Sean's talking about with aquifer storage and recovery, often called ASR, is becoming increasingly popular. And like Sean said, you don't need a really big footprint in order to construct a facility to inject water underground. And the geology of the region is such that it works really, really well for Roseville, and a number of other of the RWA member agencies are interested in this and looking at it. But there's a couple other ways of recharging the basin, and one way is to just shut off groundwater wells where they exist already. And we call that in-lieu recharge. I wish we had a better name for it, but it's called in-lieu recharge. And the geology of our region is such that when you do that type of thing or use less groundwater, the basin actually recovers fairly quickly. Now, Sean did say that groundwater does move slow, and it does, but the response of our basin is really, really nice. If you look at data from the State Department of Water Resources, over the last 20 years, groundwater levels have been increasing in the Sacramento region, and they've been going down for the most part elsewhere in the state. Sometimes
I'm actually surprised to hear you say that, Jim. I wouldn't have imagined the groundwater levels were actually rising in any place in California.
This area, there's a handful of other places, actually a small number of places. The Santa Rosa area is an example of where groundwater levels are increasing. But there's a map in a state report. It's called Bulletin 118. Issued by the State Department of Water Resources, and it has a map of California showing the groundwater trend over time. And again, it's been increasing in this region. the reason why that's happening is because this region had a head start and started building the infrastructure to allow water to be stored underground. There were and manage it in such a way that you optimally use surface water when it's available and groundwater when a lot of surface water is not available. And because of that, again, groundwater levels have been increasing, and this region has been storing water largely through this operation of turning the groundwater wells off when there's plenty of surface water available. But this region is also looking at other opportunities too. I know there's some interest south of the American River in the Consumnes River Basin of potentially using what they call flood mar, and that's a technique or an opportunity, much like spreading water on fields, agricultural fields, to allow the water to percolate underground. That's another mechanism too.
Interesting. The when you talk about shutting off groundwater wells, are those other public agency groundwater wells, or are these private consumer wells where you're trying to get them to hook up to available city water or other water systems to alternatively use surface water and not use their groundwater well during certain times of the year? Or what is that? Who are you asking to turn off wells or stop using groundwater wells?
Oh, thank you for this question. So most of the water supply in the urban area of Sacramento is from a municipal water agency. It's either a special district or a city or a county water agency. For example, in Sean's case, it's the city of Roseville that provides the water to its customers. And it's generally municipally owned groundwater wells. There are other wells in the region, particularly in rural areas where a property owner might have their own well. And we haven't really asked them to shut off their well. They don't have any alternative water supply. But in this region, we've integrated both groundwater and surface water together and continue to integrate that. So we can switch from one source of supply or another, depending on if one's more available or not.
Well, adaptability. If we've learned anything throughout the pandemic, let alone just navigating our world that we live in today, the ability to adapt is pretty darn important. So having that ability to kind of code switch between the two, I can certainly see as advantageous. How does, well, actually, first I'll just say, so this is super interesting for me in terms of learning about these nuances of methodologies for kind of banking water or storing water. Are there any other either regional or city of Roseville water conservation strategies or infrastructure investments you all have been making that you want to identify? And then once we talk about that a little bit, I'd love to talk a little bit more about this concept of, I think it's called water banking and what that really is and how that integrates with some of the technology we were talking about. But let's talk about more generally. So I heard, Sean, Roseville does recycled water. You got Purple Pipe. You're not doing any recycled water yet where it's actually getting cleaned up to the point of being potable and getting injected back in as potable water?
No, at this point, we're really not looking at that as a technology. You know, it definitely has, it has applicability in terms of direct or indirect potable reuse is the term. There's a fair amount of constraints with that type of technology. One of the biggest things is, well, number one, it's very energy intensive to treat water at that level. And, based on virtue of the fact that we have available surface water supplies that are pretty reliable, there really isn't a need for us to go to that extent. Mm-hmm. Southern California is an example. Certainly they're looking at those technologies as a means to stretch water supplies that they have. And they have limitations in terms of when you treat water at that level, that fine level, you have to deal with things like the leftover brine, and transporting that brine is very, very expensive. Hence why oftentimes brine is, you see brine disposal really at kind of more communities that are close to the coast, because they can dispose of that in that form or fashion. In terms of infrastructure, we're looking at, in addition, again, our relationship with Placer County Water Agency is really key for the city of Roseville through their Middle Fork project. We are exploring some other additional redundant access points to access available contract water we already have in place, but to better access that water. Certainly, It was, 2015 as an example. Many folks saw, Folsom Reservoir and lake level being pretty darn low, and certainly that's something that we pay very close attention to. And so we're always looking for other ways to be able to access those available water supplies. So we have some projects that we're working with them on currently. And then in terms of the other projects, I think you mentioned demand management. Certainly we have very robust water efficiency programs in place as well that we continue to utilize to use that as another portion of our tools in our toolbox, if you will.
All right. And so that's both commercial and residential water use, and kind of, I think from the residential side, it's often measured in like gallons per person or something like that on an average daily basis or some such thing.
So we have commercial and residential programs. We do things like cash for grass, where we incentivize customers to basically get their, take out their grass and put in low water use plants. We've got our water-wise house calls, where we go out and help residents really figure out how to program their timers or determine if there's leaks on their property, things like that. So really kind of on the ground services that we provide to our customers to help them reduce their water use and really try to make water efficiency an easy thing to do, generally speaking.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to keep using cash for grass as a catch line given Prop 64 and the presence of the marijuana industry in California. So you might have to revisit that one. People are going to start wondering why the water agency is trying to buy marijuana off its residents.
Yeah. I've heard that a few times.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not unique in my humor there, but it does come to mind immediately. So sample size of one. Right. How about at the Regional Water Authority? Because I heard a conversation there about scaling some of this injection work that's being done. So are there some already big scalable projects you're working on with infrastructure? Or is that part of the plan you see for the vision of your agency that you're working on, Jim?
So yes, let me address that. And one of the nice things about the water bank is it's very incremental in terms of you add on to it. We have a number of surface water treatment plants within the region that can take water from the river, treat it, and convey it to their customers. And if we build some more pipelines within the distribution systems in our region, we'll be able to broadly distribute that water to customers, and again, allow certain parts of our region to rest their wells and allow groundwater levels to increase. But the other nice thing about this is you can increase this by either pipelines or building new groundwater wells to increase the capacity of what we call the water bank. You need to build the infrastructure to be able to do that. And a nice thing is you can do it well by well. You don't have to build a large surface water reservoir all at once in order to add on to it. But if I can just go a different direction for just a second, because you talked about, or one of your questions was technology, which one might be able to harness to manage water. And what I'd like to offer on that is the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency is one of our associate members, and one of the things that they're very interested in is what they call FIRO-MAR, and that's a mouthful of letters, but FIRO is Forecast Informed Reservoir Operation, and MAR is Managed Aquifer Recovery. So FIRO.
We need more acronyms, buddy. Jim, if we don't get more acronyms, this isn't going to work. We got to have more acronyms.
I know. We need to. We have an awful lot of them. We like to invent them sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And but forecast informed reservoir operations is where you rely on increasingly being able to forecast storms coming into the region. And that's really important for flood management. If you have a large storm coming in and you can detect it through the ways that we do through weather forecasting, modeling those things, receiving information from satellites and such, we can do a better job of again, forecasting storms. And over time, that just continues to improve. the weather forecasts are so much better than they were 10 years ago and 20 years ago beyond that. Why is this important for water supply? The reason why is because we want to manage a reservoir, or the regions want to manage, and the managers who manage these reservoirs want to be able to know when the storms are coming in. That way they can hang on to the water supply if a storm sort of veers north or veers south. But if it's coming into the American River Basin, they might want to release some of the water in a reservoir to be able to accommodate storm runoff as that storm comes in. Okay, so where do they send that water? One way to deal with it is actually send it underground. And in some ways, Sean's agency does this because they're able to take floodwaters and bank it into the ground. That's something that Sean said earlier. If we can improve upon that and scale that up, that would really be helpful, not only for our region, but for other regions around the state. Again, I was talking about the flood MAR. SEPA is very interested in taking some of that water that we might release and then banking it for another day. And they're really exploring opportunities in the Consumnes River Basin to be able to store that water.
So I guess this speaks to something that just from an outside perspective is a constant headline these days, which is, I think I saw a headline yesterday. Again, it's a headline. 95% of the rain that we just got from all those storms went out to the ocean, right? So, and this has been in some circles, the battle cry is we either haven't built enough reservoirs, or we are not doing enough to try to capture the rain runoff in the first place to make sure we're banking it, and that we really have a drought of reservoirs or storage and not really a drought of actual rain. Now, I'm sure that the data indicates that rainfall itself has fallen off, which is why we're experiencing the drought. But it sounds like what you're describing is how are we going to make sure if we're only capturing X percent of the water currently coming out that river, how can we capture more of it efficiently while also maintaining our flood reduction goals or flood risk mitigation that we're required to do? Is that a fair description of ultimately what we're talking about here?
I think that is, but if I could add to that, there's around 1,400 reservoirs in California of various sizes, small to large, and Shasta Reservoir being our largest, but Folsom, just not too far away from here, is about 1 million acre feet. And it's been said that the best reservoir spots now have reservoirs on them. There are some ones that have some promise, like Sites Reservoir up in the Sacramento Valley, and there's a few in the Bay Area. There's some proposals to expand one. A really opportune location would be the Los Vaqueros Reservoir in Contra Costa County, but there really aren't that many opportunities beyond ones that you could probably count on maybe one hand.
Okay.
So the real opportune area is to advance storing water underground. And the State Department of Water Resources recently prepared a study that suggests 13 million acre feet could be stored underground in the future. For comparison, we have 50 million acre feet of surface water storage reservoirs in the state. That's at 1,400 collectively. And so this would add quite a bit of storage capacity.
26% increase in capacity.
Yes, it is. So it would really be helpful for two things. As the state grows in size, but also our changing climate, which is problematic. Our study suggests that we will lose 75% of our snowpack by the turn of the century. Our largest reservoir is what we like to call our snow reservoir. And as you know, it snows during the winter and runs off throughout the spring and into the summer. That water is needed to, one, for the environment, but also for agriculture and urban use. And we're going to lose a great deal of it in the future. So this is a water banking, not only in our region, but throughout the state, will be an opportunity to be able to adapt to this loss of snowpack in the future.
And this concept of water banking, particularly as it involves your agency, I mean, fundamentally, this is about getting that water out and primarily injecting it into the ground as a place to store it. So we're banking that water in the ground. Is that kind of the root of that term?
Yes.
All right. And is the plan for RWA to be involved in building some of that infrastructure, or are you playing an administrative overhead to help your member agencies like Roseville be able to implement their projects to do that water banking, and you're providing infrastructure and guidance on how to share that water across the region?
It's more the latter. So the RWA's role is to keep the books on what is going into the ground and out of the ground, making sure that the groundwater operations are conducted in a sustainable way, that we're not harming any other user of water, maybe a shallow domestic well owner somewhere just off the urban area in the rural areas, or maybe a groundwater dependent ecosystem. We wouldn't want that to be dewatered. So we want to create a sustainable program of making sure that no one's harmed, and we're also accounting for who puts water in the ground and who takes it out. Our members will be the ones that pump the water and build the infrastructure, but the RWA has a role in that, and that is to find opportunities for our members, maybe to apply for a grant to build a well, or to provide an opportunity for the member agencies to work together to provide some sort of benefit to the environment.
Okay. One other question that comes to mind in all of this too is, I guess, water rights to river water rights. And this is a territory I know very little about. I'm assuming you gentlemen know a lot more than I do. So like, does Roseville have water rights on the river itself, river water, and is that a certain allocation, or does the Regional Water Authority kind of aggregate up water rights for all its member agencies to represent that, or are those not really, do those only apply up to a certain volume of water and then it's kind of a free for all because there's plenty of available water? How does that work?
So do you want me to speak to the city of Roseville, Jim?
Sure. Give me a prime example on Roseville.
Yeah, so Roseville, in terms of our contract supply, so we are a CVP contractor, Central Valley Project contractor with Reclamation. So back before Folsom was constructed, there was a lot of competing water rights applications back in the 50s for water from ultimately Folsom Reservoir. Ultimately, the state of California decided to actually bestow those water rights in a consolidated fashion with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So you fast forward to today, Roseville doesn't have its own water rights. Our access to water supply really comes through virtue of our contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. So that's kind of all managed in sort of that umbrella. And there's a lot of other CVP contractors within the American River area or Sacramento region that have sort of similar circumstances, or in some cases they have some of their own water rights in combination with the CVP contracts. So there's a lot of diversity within sort of the various agencies within the umbrella of the Regional Water Authority here in Sacramento.
And then, Jim, do you have anything? Would you say would you concur with Sean in terms of your member agencies and their water rights arrangements, at least as it concerns the river? I suppose, Sean, Roseville has water rights for its groundwater supply, or is there such a thing as groundwater rights up there in your region?
Yeah, so essentially, with respect to the groundwater recharge, we have to work with the Bureau of Reclamation through their process and essentially working through their procedures and process relative to that. So, it is different depending on what agency you're talking about in California and really what type of water that you're using, whether it's project water or other types of water. And so it really just does depend on where that source water is coming from and sort of the related processes and procedures for that.
All right. Yeah. The only thing I'll add is the RWA doesn't have its own water rights or the term entitlements. That's a catch-all term for contracts or water rights or other things that a water agency might be able to supply a water supply, if you will. But I'll echo what Sean said. There's a real diversity of water entitlements either rights or contracts within the greater Sacramento region. It's amazing. There is a robust set of entitlements in this region. One agency might have a certain set of water rights that they applied for, or several water rights. Another agency might have a contract. Some agencies have what's called a settlement contract, which is really nice. Some have pre-1914 water rights. But collectively, all those entitlements will really be helpful for our members to be able to store water in the future.
Well, because ultimately, I assume some of those water rights scale in availability of water. I mean, at some point, if you have a right to nothing that exists, then it's not exactly a helpful right, correct?
That's correct. And that's the flip side of this. Sometimes there's a water right really might be helpful, but it has a priority assigned to it. And some of our member agencies might have a relatively low priority. And we have examples of that in our region. And in that case, they've actually gotten in front of this issue, and they thought about, well, how can we really improve our reliability when they only have access to surface water because they have a low priority water right part of the time. And what they do is they also utilize the groundwater basin to provide some of their water supply when there isn't water available. And then they ensure that they take what's called, and I'm going to use a real wonky term, a storage action to store water when it's available, and then recover that in the future when surface water is not available.
All right. All right. So deep dive question here. Sorry, I keep coming up with these harebrained questions, but I'm thinking about, you said Folsom is about 1 million acre feet of storage. Is that correct?
That's right.
And do you have a sense of what your likely underground storage capacity is among the RWA agencies? Like what you think you could max out at, or what you think is a reasonable amount you could be storing underground?
Right now, it's about 90,000 acre feet for the total capacity. Total capacity after improvements are made, new projects. If we didn't build any new projects, it would be 60,000 acre feet. So we plan on adding an additional 30,000 acre feet of storage capacity in the future.
And if you add that 30,000, will that be total build out, or is there even more capacity under? I mean, I would think there's more capacity under the ground, but maybe it's not reasonable because of soil composition and geography. It's
a great question. We believe that there's more capacity. The way that we arrived at this initial number was we did a survey of our members to see what type of infrastructure they have, what type of facilities that they have that could be used to store water and recover it in the future. And that's about, again, 60,000 acre feet using the existing infrastructure that we have in this region. And then what we did is asked our members, what are you planning for capital improvement projects that could add to this? And the sum total of that was 30,000 acre feet. But yes, there is the opportunity to even expand that there beyond that in a sustainable way.
Interesting. From both your perspectives, what opportunities maybe is the state missing out on, and how to collaborate with either a regional group like RWA or the city of Roseville? Sean, I'll throw it to you first, since you came from big state government and then came down to local government. Are you seeing things that are a little more confusing for you, or is there any area where you see an opportunity for improvement as a nice euphemism to better correlate or collaborate on statewide water strategy?
Yeah, I think that there's always room for improvement, certainly between all levels of government. What I find encouraging is that and I'll give you most specifically, our relationship with the federal government. It's these are really important relationships that we sort of maintain and establish in some cases. And I think what's really important just to recognize is that, there's a lot of really smart people in the water industry that really care about what they do. And, it's certainly oftentimes the conditions for collaboration really start with what are the kind of leaders out there that really sort of cultivate that expectation, right? And so, over the course of time, I've been involved in this particular industry for about 18 years. And, I've seen certainly varying levels of collaboration and cooperation at both the state and the federal level. I'd say, is everything perfect? No, certainly by no means. But I've been sort of heartened by what I've seen in terms of a general robust communication with the state of California. I think that they're certainly interested in furthering those opportunities for collaboration and working together. And I'd also say the same thing for the federal government. We've seen a significant increase in communication and the willingness to work together. In terms of water problems in California, these are big, gnarly problems to try to solve, right? And really, it's not one level of government that's going to be able to solve those problems. It's going to really require all levels of government sort of working together to really think about, what are the problems ahead and how do we want to navigate or solve those problems, and where do we want to be in the future, right? And so, I think of it more in sort of a positive or more sort of opportunity-based thinking about the situation. But I'm somewhat heartened in terms of where we're at. There's a lot of big problems out there, but I feel pretty good right now where we're at, and certainly hope to encourage more of that from where I sit in the future.
And Jim, from your perspective, you mentioned that RWA, part of your calling or mission is to advocate. So what are you advocating for? Like, what are you representing your agencies on? Typically that advocacy would usually be directed at the state, but maybe it's directed at an agency or it's directed at the Fed. So what are you out pushing?
It's out, but maybe what I'll do is start by saying that over the last 22 years since the RWA has formed, we've helped our members obtain about $80 million in grants. And that has in turn allowed the region to build 30,000 acre feet of underground storage. That was coupled with about $200 million in ratepayer funds. So 80 million from the state, 200 million locally to build 30,000 acre feet of groundwater capacity. That's enough for 60 to 90,000 homes. And that's a sizable population when you think about that. It's really improved our water supply. So one of the things that we want to continue to do is just have a partnership with the state of California and the federal government. And that's working really, really well. We're having the opportunity to help our members improve their water supply reliability in the future by communicating what our challenges are, which is really advocacy, right? And be able to explain to them, what our member agencies need from the state of California. And we have a really good relationship with the State Department of Water Resources and the California Natural Resources Agency. That has improved because we have something called the RWA. And increasingly, we're having a really great relationship with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which manages Folsom Reservoir and is really the primary water supply, surface water supply to our member agencies in the greater Sacramento region.
All right. Well, those all sound like reasonable goals and objectives and positive outcomes that you guys have made over the last 22 years of existence. The advantage, so does that mean you were formed in 2000?
The RWA formed in 2001.
You just missed the window there. See, the trick is you form in 2000. That way, every time your anniversary comes up, you remember exactly what anniversary it is.
I know. That's why I was struggling with the math when I was saying 20, 21, 22. So I wish we were formed in 2000. That would have made it so much easier.
Well, I'm a smart guy, so I got married in 2000. So therefore, it's always been easy to remember my anniversary. I have one other question I want to dive into real quick around water quality issue, actually, and just kind of talk about where it's been maybe affecting or not affecting your region. But before I do, anything else on water banking you gentlemen want to discuss? We cover that territory.
Sean, is there anything else?
No, I think it's, again, I think it's just the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, holds a tremendous amount of potential. Jim's organization, the Regional Water Authority, is doing a really good job in terms of really partnering with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to gain federal recognition. And so there's a lot more work ahead, but we've certainly, I think, made a lot of progress in moving forward. The benefit of Regional Water Authority is it does convene the water agencies to come together to really figure out how we can work cooperatively together. And so, City of Roseville, we're very engaged in the process and really looking forward to really forging those sort of the institutional and financial relationships that need to be put together to be able to have a good functioning water bank. And so we're very bullish about the water bank here in Sacramento region, and super happy with the progress that the Regional Water Authority has made in this area.
Great. Well, at the risk of not ending on that nice wrap up, I do want to ask about one other issue that just it's been in the public conscious for a while, and it's something we've seen with the clients that my firm, Tripepi Smith, works with, which is PFAS issues and PFOA. I was just curious, and this has typically affected more industrial and urban areas, which, Roseville certainly is as a newer community and much more suburban, probably hasn't been affected by. But has that been an issue at all out your way or in the region generally where RWA covers your territory, or has PFAS have you been fortunate enough to avoid those issues? And just, I guess, for the audience, PFAS, PFOA are some chemicals that were created for various reasons, but ultimately they also prove to be not good for human health and don't disappear very easily. And they've been affecting water wells throughout California that have resulted in several wells actually getting shut down. So I was just curious to see how it's affected your region.
Sean, do you want to take that one first, or do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, in terms of PFOA, PFAS, obviously within the region, we're really obviously tracking that issue very closely. There is, through both state and federal government, there are some both legislative and regulatory efforts to really get our arms around PFOA, PFAS. It's in terms of what we have to do to maintain our permit to provide water, we constantly have to test. There is a round of testing coming up within sort of the state of California and I believe nationwide, where PFOA, PFAS, ultimately there's going to be a round of testing that has to occur. Yeah, it's certainly a tricky issue, specifically when you talk about groundwater wells and having PFOA, PFAS potentially come up in a groundwater well is certainly problematic. There is, and I know that there has been some investments in terms of being able to, in circumstances where you have a PFOA, PFAS detect in those groundwater wells, there's treatment technology that you can actually utilize to be able to treat for PFOA, PFAS before it's actually served to the public. So, if an agency ultimately has that come up, that's a decision or an assessment and decision they're going to have to make in terms of what they want to do going forward. So, we're obviously tracking the issue very closely, and it is problematic. I would say one thing too is we're certainly interested, I think, in terms of making sure that the responsibility for PFOA, PFAS, we really need to look at where it's being manufactured or being generated. And so there is some notion that the folks that are creating this pollution, if you will, really we need to be working towards finding out where that area of responsibility is, and then ultimately, hopefully, getting PFOA and PFAS out of consumer products, because this chemical is very problematic at this point. And I think over time, with the regulatory efforts, we'll start to see that diminishes the threat, but it's going to take some considerable amount of time to get there.
Yeah, well, the class action lawsuits are already running. So they're, and part of those class action lawsuits are being waged by water agencies themselves seeking economic reparations to most often implement granular activated carbon, GAC, solutions, at least as the primary solution I've seen implemented. I'm not sure what else has been out there, but that's what I've seen so far. I'm not sure if reverse osmosis also addresses it or not, but Jim, you got any comments about the region in general, and I mean, detect issues or anything like that, or is it anybody had to implement a GAC or similar solution for PFAS, PFOA?
I'm not aware of anyone implementing a treatment system in our region. I am aware of a well, or maybe a couple of wells rather, that have been contaminated with that chemical. Generally, what happens is an owner of that well shuts the well down, and it's very expensive to treat. It is people are on the lookout for that, and like Sean said, it's continuously being tested. And we do have just a handful of legacy sites where that could be a problem within the region. But we also have groundwater. Groundwater travels very, very slowly, so that's one of the benefits of groundwater. It's also a problem with groundwater. I mean, you can't fill up a groundwater basin very, very quickly. It takes a lot of infrastructure, and you have to do it at scale in order to fill it up fast. But the flip side of that is groundwater travels very, very slowly, and it gives you the opportunity to really shut off a well and manage the groundwater basin in such a way that you prevent it from migrating elsewhere. So that's one of the upsides of that. But other than what Sean said, I agree with everything what Sean said, and I'm looking for the opportunity to redress, bring solutions to this, and also have a situation where the polluters pay, for the cleanup.
Yeah. Well, and I don't raise this to freak people out, because the truth is this has been slow rolling for a while, and there is some pretty heavy regulations that are out there that frankly prompted some of the testing that's going on. And everybody should know that if you detect at certain levels that the government has determined are problematic, you get notification on it. So it's not like it's playing hide the football in this stuff. Like, notification happens, you're made aware. So it's not like you need to be running down to your local water purveyor and demanding to know if they've tested or not. Like, they are testing, they are informing you if there's an issue or otherwise, and they're certainly ensuring that it meets federal and state water quality standards to make it to your tap. That's always kind of goal number one, and that it's fair to assume that is the case in your water supply. So it'll be an interesting issue to see it unfold as time goes by, and see how we work to implement more innovation. I think the one question, given all this talk about groundwater too, it does strike me that this is a layman's question, I guess, but if I am putting good water into a good well and consistently recharging it, that would, to the extent there was any risk formed by kind of water intrusion or transition, it tends to preserve the quality of the water that's in the ground if I'm consistently recharging it with quality water in the ground. Is that a fair statement, given how hydrology works?
Sean, you want to address that? I have my own perspective on that.
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, yeah, we, certainly it's interesting because the city of Roseville back in the early 2000s went through sort of a proof of concept process with the state of California in order to receive our discharge permit and an operational permit to be able to have an aquifer storage and recovery system within Roseville. And so we actually had to do a lot of testing in terms of, how does recharging with treated surface water, how does that interact within the groundwater basin, and really kind of looking at the science behind that. After that series of really rigorous testing, working with the state of California, it was determined that there wasn't a risk to the public in terms of how that surface water interacts within the groundwater basin. And that certainly the state was comfortable at that point in time to permit the system. And that was I think a sort of a significant event, I think, in California, because we went through a lot of effort to really get that first permit of that kind really established, and I think it set a really good precedent for the rest of California and the agencies that want to invest in aquifer storage and recovery. So the science is there. It's been looked at and deemed safe for use in terms of providing that water back to the public when we actually extract it.
Right.
Yeah, Ryder, if I could add,
Please.
In addition to the tool of removing things that you don't want in your water supply, when you put water into the ground, it's another tool in the toolbox for managing a groundwater basin and making sure that the very, very clean parts of your aquifer of your groundwater system remain clean. So I'm glad you said that, because that is one of the tools of the toolbox.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting side benefit. Partly my inspiration for the question is like I live down in Southern California, closer to the water, and they've been using groundwater injection to try to hold saltwater intrusion at bay coming into our groundwater supplies. So they're consistently trying to use that methodology to also maintain the water quality within our own groundwater supply down here in Orange County, for example. So,
yes.
Well, you guys are bona fide water nerds, so thank you for your time today. I love talking water. I mean, I always tell my my wife, like, the value of land without water is zero. So water matters to all of us, particularly here in California, not just to drink and not just to make life go and make our sewer systems work, but fundamentally we got economic interests around our water too.
Absolutely.
And with that, that's today's report. My thanks to Sean and Jim for joining us for the time. From the whole PublicCEO team, myself, Ryder, Todd, Smith, I want to thank you for your time. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that will help you in your public service. Remember, PublicCEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. If you have feedback, questions, or guest suggestions for PublicCEO Report, please email editor@PublicCEO.com.